All right. Well, I know some more folks are going to be trickling in, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, so yeah, thanks for joining us today for, as I mentioned, our oral history and practice event series. Today's topic being documenting refugee stories. Really excited folks for joining us. I know from all different places and time zones, so really happy to have you here with us. Just a few workshop norms as we get started. We are recording the webinar. I believe that's correct, Anik. Yes, Anik is our behind the scenes Valley. And so the webinar will be recorded and you'll get a link to that recording in the follow-up email after this session. So if you have to leave or be in and out for any reason, if you have to leave early, no worries. You'll be able to listen to the full conversation with that recording link. There are automated captions available in the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom window. So please feel free to use that if you need to. If you're having any tech issues, you can directly message myself, Ella Banerjee, or the Voice of Witness box in Zoom, and we can give you some tech help. As I mentioned before, would love to have folks use the chat box for introductions. You can share, your name, if you'd like to share your pronouns, where you're based, if you're, in North America, if you'd like to acknowledge the indigenous lands you're on, and anything else you'd like to share with us today, including, what you're interested in learning. And we also encourage you to use the chat box throughout the workshop, throughout the conversation today, as Diya and Fanny are having a conversation, sharing your questions, reflections, reactions, how things resonate to your own work. We will be looking out for the questions and holding on to them because we are going to have a Q&A section at the end. So feel free to, share those questions as we're moving through the workshop, or at the end, you can also ask the questions. So I know I'm just looking at the folks who are joining us. I see some familiar names, which is awesome, as well as some new folks. So welcome to everyone here. I know folks might already be very familiar with what we do at Voice of Witness, and some folks might be newer. So we just want to give a brief introduction / reintroduction to who we are. So we are Voice of Witness, also known as VOW from our initials, and we're an oral history nonprofit. And really, we believe in the transformative power of storytelling, particularly first person narrative and storytelling and oral history, where we get to hear directly from people who have lived experience around different social justice and human rights issues. And we really believe in focusing on the stories of people with lived experience, people who are impacted by and also fighting against injustice. And it's by flipping the script and really making sure that these folks who normally don't get the mic in mainstream media and in society, making sure they get the mic and they are being deeply heard. We really believe that's how we can address all these different social justice issues that we're faced with today. And so we do our programming in a number of different ways. We have our editorial series where we've published over 20 books, all oral history books focused on a number of different topics, including migration, displacement, climate crisis, the criminal justice system within the US, a number of different books, each including a collection of folks who share their stories with us. We call them our narrators. We also have an education program where we share these stories, these books, as well as different curriculum on how to do your own oral history project. We share them with students and teachers in classrooms from across the US. Really cool to see what students come up with. They've done oral history podcasts, oral history cookbooks. It's such a creative way to connect to oral history if you're an educator. And we also have our community partnership program where we connect to other orgs who are doing direct service on the ground with communities we work with, including people who are immigrants and refugees, people affected by the carceral system. And we really connect to see how can our storytelling resources, how can our ethical approach to oral history and storytelling, how can that support people's work that they're doing on the ground? How could it support their advocacy as they're trying to impact change and create policy change? So there's a number of different ways that we work with community members. If you're listening and you want to connect with us, we can tailor doing different workshops and consultancies and developing resources. So definitely please reach out to us. We love getting to hear from folks. And I've already touched on, what oral history is, and as you can see, all the different ways that we integrate it into Voice of Witness. But we really think that there's so many different applications to, why oral history is such an important tool for so many different ways, and especially right now. We already mentioned education. It's a really powerful way to teach history, including the history we're living through in this very moment, to students, to really, invite them to be in the driver's seat, to know that they're their part of history and to also think critically and ask deep questions. As we mentioned, it's a tool for advocacy. Using first person testimony is so powerful to show how issues, how policies are actually affecting real life people. And it's important to trust and to look to people with lived experience for their expertise. And we really believe in oral history as a tool for just community building, for building connection, for helping people feel a sense of healing and connection, to be really seen and heard. And we think that there's people are interested in storytelling in so many different ways, but there's so many ethics and complexities involved in storytelling. And we want to make sure storytelling is focusing on the narrator. It's not doing further harm, but rather, centering their agency. So oral history is such a powerful way to engage in ethical storytelling and overall to create narrative change, to question what are the narratives that are prevalent in our society that need to be questioned, that need to be challenged, and for us to, fight back against those different stereotypes and assumptions and be able to promote the narrative that is true to narrators' lived experiences. So many different applications for oral history. You can learn more about, I see my colleague is dropping different links in the chat. So a lot of different connections to oral history. But what's so great about the oral history and practice series that we've been doing is that it gives us a chance to connect with some of our friends, our collaborators, people we really admire who are doing amazing work utilizing oral history and first person storytelling out in the community. And we get a chance to just have a deep, intimate conversation with some of these friends and to hear, how are they applying these skills? What are the lessons they've learned? What are some of the really cool projects they've done? What are challenges they're facing? And to really get a chance to hear directly from them and see that there are so many different ways to practice and apply oral history. So this spring, we've had two great conversations on different topics, and we're really excited to have a special guest here to have this third conversation this spring for oral history in practice. And so, yeah, really excited to have Diya here with us. So I'm going to do some introductions, and then you'll be hearing less from me and more focus on the conversation between Fanny and Diya. So I am Ella Banerjee. I'm the Community Partnership Manager here at Voice of Witness, but I'm very excited to introduce my awesome colleague, Fanny Garcia. Fanny is editorial and program manager at VOW, and she's also an independent oral historian working with immigration narratives. When she's not collaborating on and marking up manuscripts or teaching and scouting projects and partnerships, she's tending to her array of indoor plants. And I can testify from Zooming with Fanny a lot that she has a lot of really amazing plants in her apartment. Fanny, would you like to just say hi and say where you're calling from?
Hi, everyone. I am in Harlem, New York City, which is known as Lenapehoking. And I'm really excited to be here with you today and to speak with Diya.
Thanks so much, Fanny. And very, very excited to introduce our special guest for today, Dr. Diya Abdo. She is a professor of English at Guilford College and the founding director of Every Campus a Refuge, also known as ECAR, which advocates for housing refugee families on college and university campus grounds and supports them in their resettlement. I know we'll talk a lot more about that program today. A second generation Palestinian refugee born and raised in Jordan, Diya's teachings, research, and scholarship focus on Arab women writers, Arab and Islamic feminisms, and refugee and immigrant issues. Diya is the recipient of the Emerson Collective Fellowship, the J.M. Kaplan Fund's Innovation Prize, and she sits on the boards of the Community Sponsorship Hub and Refugee Council USA. So excited to have you here with us, Diya. Do you want to say hello and say where you're calling from?
Yes, definitely. Hi, everybody, and shout out to my Greensboro, North Carolina folks. I see a couple of names that I recognize, some wonderful people from Greensboro and also North Carolina, and that's where I'm zooming from today. So great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to pass it over to Fanny now to dive into the conversation. I know that we have so much that we want to talk to you all about, so excited to hear this session.
Wonderful.
Diya, we're so excited to have you. Val is such a great admirer of your work, and we're so happy to have you with us today and to learn more about your work. And I'm particularly interested personally because, as Ella mentioned, I have, for the past 5 years, been documenting the narratives of families that were separated at the border. And I grew up as an undocumented immigrant in California as well, and lived through many policies in California that wanted to prevent access to education and medical care for immigrants. And so I think it's really cool that we get to learn about e-car, and we'll put it into context for folks in a little bit because it's great to hear a happy story in these times. And I think your work really speaks to how people can get involved, how institutions have a responsibility to people who have been displaced. Um, your work especially is important because you amplify those stories of immigrants, refugees, people displaced by war, climate change, and many other man-made issues that impact the ability for people to stay and thrive in their homelands. You also use oral history as a powerful tool for documentation, advocacy and solidarity efforts from within the communities you work with, and you work hard to include others in this process, including students, institutions, and community organizations, and all in an effort to challenge the heightened dominant narratives which seek to vilify and criminalize immigration today. So thank you again, Dia, for joining us. And I wanted to first get you to tell us about how oral history and storytelling became such an essential part of your work, your research, your scholarship.
Sure. And, I didn't know at the time that it was oral history, but I want to say that for me, growing up in Jordan, the person that influenced my upbringing the most and my understanding of what it meant to be Palestinian and what it meant to be displaced was my grandmother. And the way that she expressed herself and her identity to me, of course, was through stories. My grandmother sadly did not get a chance to pursue her education. She was illiterate, but she valued education greatly and really made sure. Oh, thank you. We're showing a picture of my grandmother. I love this picture so much. That's my teta. She is the one that has the beaming smile on her face, holding up a bowl of food. And she's very happy because she's with other family members. And I think that's going to be a running theme that we talk about today, which is that what makes people happy is being with their community and being with their families and being with the people that they love. And so I was raised by my grandmother in Jordan, and my grandmother, along with her daughter, my mother, and her son, my uncle, they became displaced in 1967, and they lived as refugees in Jordan, and they later integrated. And for folks who are on this call and don't know that some of these terms, integration in this context means that you become a citizen of that country, and that's a really important part of the refugee journey. 99% of refugees, individuals who are displaced from their countries, will never experience being able to be citizens of a country. They will remain stateless, without access, without rights. And so for my family to have integrated into Jordan and to become Jordanian citizens was empowering and powerful and allowed us to be able to be mobile and allowed me to leave Jordan and to study in the US as a graduate student. But to go back to the oral history piece, I was raised on her stories. Every night, she would tell me about Palestine, about her sisters, about her brothers, about going to the well to get water. So it was very clear that she loved Palestine dearly, that she missed it deeply, and that she wanted to be in Palestine, right? She wanted to be back home. And so that was the oral history that I grew up on, which is that to be a refugee for my grandmother, and for me, that was sort of the formative identity at the time of what it meant to be a refugee, was to feel like you were out of place, that you never belonged, that you were constantly yearning, longing to be back home. And so I would say that later on, as I started my professional career as a professor, the stories of women, especially, was central to my interest, whether it was Arab women writers or Arab and Islamic feminists. I wanted to hear from them directly, whether it was through their writing or their interviews, what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be Arab, to be Muslim, and what it meant to forge a path for yourself in your community with those multiple identities. And then, of course, when I came to the U.S. and I started teaching, I was teaching Arab women writers and Arab and Islamic feminists. But then, of course, I was deeply interested in refugees and especially Syrian refugees in 2015. And in 2015, as I was pondering kind of, what is it that I could do as an individual, but also as a professor who had at her disposal the vast resources of a higher education institution, because that's how I saw it. I saw myself as a person that had access to incredible resources. What is it that I could do? And Pope Francis called on every parish in Europe to host the refugee family in 2015. May he rest in peace. The thought struck me that a parish is, a small city, a college or university is a small city. It makes perfect sense for colleges and universities to act in that way, to be to engage in radical hospitality, which is what the Pope was calling on. And so this picture that you see is the wonderful group from Guildford College, and it contains a multitude of people. These are professors, these are staff members, these are students, these are friends of people. This is the community. This is the Guildford College community coming together to say, yes, we want to be a campus refuge. This is before we hosted our first guest. This was in September of 2015. So we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of ECAR as an initiative, as a movement rooted in hospitality and welcome, rooted in social justice, and rooted in imagination. Fanny, if we get a chance at the end, I think you said at the beginning, it's so nice to hear a happy story. I'm not sure if it was you or Ella who said happy. And I said, I was thinking, well, remind me later to tell you about the phase that I'm living in right now, which I'm calling my radical hope phase. Because when we started ECAR, we were all in the radical hospitality phase. How do we engage in acts of hospitality that welcome others in ways that make them feel rooted, that make them feel like my grandmother didn't feel? My grandmother never felt like she belonged. And that was because she felt excluded. The community didn't make her feel like she belonged. What can we do as a community to make people feel like they belong? And so that's the context. It's been 10 years since we started hosting refugees on Guildford's campus, refugee families that come from all over. And now the initiative has grown to 20 campuses across the US. If you go to the slide with the logos, you'll get a sense of where the effort is taking place across the country. It is really quite diverse, right? It's happening on the West Coast, on the East Coast, in the middle, in what we would consider quote unquote red states, blue states, rural, urban, two-year institutions, four-year institutions, public, private, urban, rural, small, big. Any campus truly can engage in this work of opening its resources and its doors to welcome newcomers to its community.
I love that, Diya. Thank you so much for giving us all of that context. And regarding the photo of your grandma, I wish I could dive into that photo and partake of all the delicious Palestinian food and listen to the sounds of your family's conversation. It looks like such a beautiful, happy gathering. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank
And and yeah, Diya, I looked up the article that you first wrote in 2015 about that influenced and sparked the inspiration for Every Campus a Refuge. And in it, you wrote, what do academic institutions do with broken hearts, with the dead and dying bodies, with the endless convoy of humanity trying to make its way from misery to the unknown? What is our responsibility as teachers, students, and as administrators of higher learning? What is our complicity as institutions built on the lands of the dispossessed and displaced? This quote just resonates so much more loudly and deeply today. Please tell us about this idea of like complicity and our responsibility to help people who are on the move.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I want to say that when we first started this initiative, Every Campus a Refuge, this response to the Pope's call was a call to radical hospitality. And the word radical means root, or or the root of the word is root. And so I like to think that when we first started, it was this idea of how do we engage in work, as I said, that makes people feel rooted, that makes them feel welcomed, but that's also just goes beyond checking a box, right?
Mm.
um goes beyond sort of the typical gestures that you make to welcome people, that you really engage in extraordinary or out of the ordinary acts of welcome to make people feel like they belong, like they matter all the time. And then over time, it became very clear to me that that really wasn't just it. It wasn't enough to say, oh, we want to be helpful, we want to be hospitable, because that's nice, but it's also rooted in typically sort of, unfortunately, resettlement work has been rooted in missionary or the sort of the savior approach, right? How do we save people? How do we help them? Which comes from a place that does not necessarily center them, but center ourselves as saviors. And it was clear to me that higher education needed to do this work not only because it can be hospitable, but because it must. Higher education institutions in the US are built. You all did an acknowledgement and you encouraged others in the chat to acknowledge the indigenous lands that they sit on, and that they have. That they now have inherited, right? That we as a country have displaced the indigenous peoples of this land. And we as a country have created one of the largest movements of forced displacements, enslaved Africans who were brought to this country, on whose country this, the wealth of this country is built, is a movement of forced displacement of epic proportions. And we all benefit from that as higher education institutions. Not only that, higher education institutions are, of course, benefit from being part of the US and the US government, which in itself currently and historically has participated in geopolitical actions that have forcibly displaced individuals. I mean, I think of the Afghan evacuation, 85,000 people. That certainly didn't just happen. There's a context to that, and there's a political context to that that we are very much involved in. And it's also important to remember that higher education institutions, sometimes the way they act in their communities is not neighborly. There are institutions that displace neighborhoods. They displace neighbors because they might be buying out property to build dorms or to build facilities. And so I think we need to, not I think, I know we need to hold higher education institutions accountable to what we benefit from historically, but also our actions as institutions in the community. Are we actually being good neighbors? Are we being good stewards of the resources that are at our disposal? And what can we do to repair, right? So if we're thinking about reparations, even, what can we do as institutions to pay back, to give back, to support? To me, it's just a small thing that you can do to support newcomers who have been forcibly displaced, potentially because of the geopolitical involvement of this country, that are now finding themselves at our shores, in need of our welcome and in need of our support. It's a small thing that we can do to hold ourselves accountable. So when I think about institutions and what they need to do, it's not just about radical hospitality, but this concept of radical accountability that is rooted in social justice and rooted in acknowledgement of our complicity beyond a land acknowledgement, right? A land acknowledgement is wonderful, but then what do you do after you acknowledge that you have displaced indigenous people? What do you do as an institution to put your money where your mouth is and to use your resources in ways that support your community members beyond the traditional modes of engagement?
Yeah, and what do you do to invest in the survival and the thriving of the community that you want to help? Thank you so much for that explanation, Dia. Can you tell me how the oral history project evolved from the e-car program and why you wanted to create that?
Sure. So the oral history project that we're talking about is called Salt, which means voice in Arabic. And it's an oral history that seeks to document the stories of refugees that have been hosted by colleges and universities across this country over the last 10 years. It's very clear to all of us that we need to hear the stories of every person who's part of an experience, right? And so there's the campus narrative, right? The students and the faculty and the staff who are engaged in this. There is, of course, the community narrative, right? The folks who volunteer. But to me, what needs to be centered is the narrative of the individual who experiences being on a campus as a hosted refugee, right? What did that experience look like for them? We really wanted to amplify the experience of being someone hosted by a college or university for several reasons. First of all, we wanted to amplify those voices and to center those voices. So again, it's not just about the campus as helper, the campus as savior, or the campus as engaged in the community. All of those things, especially the campus as engaged in the community, is crucial. We wanted to make sure that we amplified the voices of the individuals who experienced living on a campus as hosted refugees. Part of the reason was because we wanted to create more campuses or to establish more ECAR chapters that were designed to serve the needs of newcomers, right?
Mhm.
So we wanted to learn from newcomers. What was it like to be hosted by a campus? What was good about it? What needed improvement? What were some of the things that you wished were there but weren't? What are some of the things that you really enjoyed about being on a campus? So we wanted to make sure that whatever ECAR chapters were going to be created in the future, and we hope, again, I mean, every campus a refuge literally means we want every campus to be a refuge. So when those campuses began to design their refuge efforts, their radical hospitality, their ecosystems, we wanted to give them a set of tools and a set of stories that told them plainly and clearly, here are what the individuals who might be hosted on your campus would like to see and what they were excited to experience when they were hosted by other campuses. We want you to keep that in mind as you design your campus refuge. So it what really was about making sure that we centered the needs and the desires of refugees in the creation of resettlement campuses. And resettlement campus is just a term that we use to describe a campus that acts as a site for resettlement. It acts as a place where refugees find home. They find family. They find belonging. We wanted to ensure that those voices were central to the design of those resettlement campus ecosystems.
Can you share what part of your oral history process is to then adapt the oral history interviews into videos, comics, literary narratives? And so what led to transforming these transcriptions, these audio recordings into different formats?
Um, so when we first started, this was about a year and a half ago. The idea began almost 2 years ago, but we didn't start the project, of course, until January of 2024. And we wanted to make sure that everything else that we do at ECAR is collaborative, is co-designed and co-created with everybody who's quote unquote stakeholder or a participant in the initiative. And we also wanted to make sure that we were nimble and flexible, right? So we didn't have a set plan. We knew that we wanted to collect stories. And part of the process was putting together an advisory group that allowed us, and this advisory group was made up of faculty, students, former refugees, refugees hosted by ECAR chapters, resettlement agency staff. So everybody in the ecosystem, we wanted to make sure that their voice was represented in the development of this oral history process, from the interview protocol to the interview setup to then the curation and then the sharing of those stories. One of the most important pieces that came up, of course, was that we wanted to center the ways in which the individuals that were interviewed wanted their stories to be shared. And so one of the questions was, how would you like for us to share your story? Would you like it to be shared as a narrative? Would you like it to be shared as a documentary? Would you like it to be shared in art form? Would you like it? And so we took that very seriously. And some folks were very clear. They said, I want it to be as realistic as possible. And so on our website, you'll see documentaries. And some folks said, I'm not comfortable with being realistically represented. I want to see myself in cartoon form. And so we had a comic artist develop some comics for us. You see here Adiba and Fahim's story. They're a family from Afghanistan that was hosted by Russell Sage College in Troy, New York. So that's one of the comics. There are others on our website. And then, of course, all of them, we made sure that we created narrative pieces so that folks can read. And one of the interviewers, another very important piece, is that all of the interviewers were former refugees. We really wanted this to be a bias for us, about us project, so that the protocol itself was designed to be inclusive of refugee voices, that the people who conducted the interviews were former refugees themselves, and all of them were connected to higher education. Two of them were hosted by colleges and universities and ICAR chapters. And then, of course, the curation of the stories themselves, we wanted that to be informed by refugee desires, the individual's desire, how they wanted to see themselves represented in the world. And, once we created all of these stories, of course, we shared them with the individuals and they approved of them. And so they're in the world now with their consent. And so this is, for me, this is an example of not only sharing stories in ways that might appeal to a variety of audiences, right? We were talking earlier before we began that not everybody is going to read maybe a 6-page narrative. They might be more inclined to look at a 2-page comic. And what we hope, Fanny, is that all of these open access resources, because ICAR is very committed to creating resources that are open access, that can be used in any context that folks can want to use it to support refugees. So we're hoping that folks will download these, whether it's the comics or the narratives or documentaries, and use them in classrooms, use them in their conferences, use them as a way to encourage students to learn more and to advocate for newcomers. And so we're hoping that these are also educational pieces that can be used by professors and teachers.
And I'm curious, Dia, if you also ask folks when you ask them about how they want to be represented or their story to be represented, if you also ask them in what ways they would want their story used for advocacy purposes, and if you could share an example of how these stories have directly influenced policy discussions, institutional culture, or community perceptions.
Yeah. So because we had to obviously go through an IRB process, so this was initially all vetted through Guilford College's IRB. And then when we reached out to the campuses, and this is an important piece, there are 20 ICAR chapters. We reached out to all of the ICAR chapters. There is a great trust that has been developed between ICAR, the national organization, and myself, and the ICAR leads at the 20 campuses. So we reached out and said, we would love to share the stories of individuals that were hosted by your campus. Are there any folks who would be interested? And so they reached out to folks within their ecosystem. And so this is an interesting example of how concentric circles of trust can allow for the sort of development and sharing of stories. So I don't know all of these individuals, but we have built trust with the ICAR chapters who have built trust within their ecosystems. And then when we sent out the request, we were very clear why we were collecting these stories. We told the interviewees, we want to collect these stories so that we can advocate for the creation of university and college campuses that can host refugees on their campus in the way that you have been hosted by the campus, whether it's James Madison University or Russell Sage or Wake Forest University. And so the advocacy piece was very clear. And another thing that was very important was that all of the questions for the interviews were shared well in advance of the interview in the language of the interviewee. The interviews themselves were conducted in the language of the interviewee, whether it was Spanish or Dari or Arabic or English. And so I think that made folks more excited because in one particular interview, for example, it was Auri and Fabriziano who were hosted by Lafayette College. They're a family from Ecuador. And at the end of the interview, Auri says, I researched resettlement and only one person out of a million gets resettled. And she talks about how that feels miraculous to her that they were resettled. And she says, I want more people to be resettled like me. I want, this shouldn't be a miracle. I want more campuses to engage in this work. And so I think it was really lovely that folks who wanted to be interviewed and wanted to share their story realized that it was A, so that there could be more campuses that allowed other people to be resettled like them, but that also those campuses could create and design programming that met their needs as much as possible. In terms of policy, I think it's too early to tell. I will mention that before this, I had engaged in another oral history project, which was my book, American Refuge, True Stories of the Refugee Experience. That was published in 2022 and is the story of 7 refugees. That was selected by North Carolina as a North Carolina Reads book and by Alamance Public Libraries as an Alamance Reads book. And that allowed me to enter spaces that I've never been in before.
Mm,
Churches, faith communities, public libraries across the state. People showed up who didn't know anything about refugees but were really intrigued. And to me, this is a conversation starter. This
mm,
brings people to the table. This allows us to demystify and to bust very damaging and harmful narratives about immigrants and refugees from people who really are genuinely curious but have no idea other than what they see in the mainstream media.
yeah, I think it's a really powerful resource that you've created. Um, I want to ask you about the ethical practices of documenting stories of refugees. And I'm going to start with something I saw on your website, which is that you created a practical guide for how to interview and ethical principles for interviewing refugees who have been resettled. And in that guide, you listed, you were very open that you compensated your narrators. And I think narrator compensation is an ethical question that many oral historians have, many people working with stories have, and there are a lot of questions around it. So I would love to hear your take on why narrator compensation was a central part of the projects that you've created.
Yeah, well, for us, it's really a question of labor,
Mm,
right? So a person who is sharing their story, that is labor. A person who's doing the interviews, that is labor. So we have to compensate people for their labor. I mean, that's a fair practice. So whether it's the interviewers, any time that they spent doing the intake interviews, because we did intake interviews before the actual interview to build rapport between the interviewers and the interviewees. Some of these interviews were conducted by Zoom, some of them were conducted in person. And then, of course, the participants themselves or the interviewees were compensated for their time. Um, the consideration came in terms of the amount, because one of the things that you have to think about is the compensation has to be such that the interviewee can say no,
mm,
right? It can't be an amount that makes people say yes even when they don't want to say yes. So it's kind of that balance. And really, we just sort of crowdsource that. We talk to the advisory group, we talk to oral historians, and we just decided that this is the amount that was fair in terms of compensating people for their labor, but was also not an amount that people would want to say yes to, even if they felt like they didn't want to move forward with sharing their story.
Did anyone who you interviewed say no to the compensation, or they said keep it donated, or
Um, I don't think we ever gave people that option, honestly. It was never an option. It was, people completed the interview and we sent them the stipend.
love it. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Well, we're just about time, and I wanted to ask you if you have anything else that you wanted to share about the project before we pass it on back to Ella, who will guide our Q&A with our audience.
Yes, you had sent me some prep questions, and one of them I really loved, and I want to share very quickly. One of the questions that you had wanted to ask me was what were some of the themes that emerged in these 19 stories? And there were two very clear themes that emerged, which did not surprise me, but kind of surprised me. That the thing that people value most about being hosted in this way is not the free housing, it's not the access to free amenities and facilities. It's the student that shows up to have tea with them in the afternoon. It's the connections that they make with people.
Mm,
So the first and most prominent theme was that in every case, people felt like they found family.
mm,
And that was a key to their sense of belonging. The other thing that I found fascinating is that every interviewee, these people have never met each other, by the way. These are people from Oklahoma, from Washington State, from North Carolina, from New York. These are not individuals who know each other. Every single one of them had a version of the following sentence. We felt like we were the homeowners, and the campus people felt we felt like they were the guests. And so this idea that you have managed to create a situation in which people feel like they're not the guests, that this is their house. Your
mm,
campus is their home.
mhm,
They're the homeowners.
mhm.
Really felt very powerful and moving to me. That yeah, that was an incredibly moving piece, and almost every interviewee said a version of that. That we felt like we didn't feel like we were the guests. We felt like we were the owners of the house.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dia. This has been such a great conversation. And is this the
Oh, yeah. So let me just share very quickly. This is one of the guests that we hosted on our campus at Guilford College. His name is Ali. And I love sharing his story because it's a great example of what a college or university can do in terms of thinking with abundance about its resources. I want to say this now out loud because we're at a time when we are being asked to think in the opposite way. We're being asked to think with a mindset of scarcity. We are being asked to think in the context of, what can I keep? Why we don't have enough. People, we have more than enough. So I want you to think with a mindset of abundance, especially if you're on a college campus. Ali was able to access, he's an artist. He was able to access art supplies, an art studio. We have a gallery on our campus. He was able to exhibit his artwork. So I want you to think about the campus resources in really abundant and innovative out of the box ways. But the cool thing about this too is the next picture, which is when we got a chance to meet Pope Francis in 2022, Ali sent him a gift. And this gift is a plate that says in it the verse in Arabic that the Pope quoted when he called on every parish to host a refugee family. This that you do unto the least brothers of mine, you do unto me, from Matthew 25:40. And then the chapel in the middle is the chapel of the Milk Grotto, which is in Bethlehem, Palestine. And I mean, I just love seeing the Pope's face look at it. I'm sure he was confused at the beginning, but when Kathleen, in her 30 seconds, was able to explain to him, he was
Yeah.
he was very moved by the gesture. But we love that we were able to gift that Ali was able to gift the Pope a plate that really represented our shared hope for welcome, for hospitality, but also for accountability. And now this moment of hope, radical hope. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about radical hope.
Yes, please, because we need to end on that note.
Yes.
Because I think in these times, we really do need to think of radical new ways to see how we do our work and how our work serves people and how to reimagine the institutions
Yeah.
that surround us.
Yes. Well, I know it doesn't feel like it, but I'm going to say this. This administration too shall pass. And this is very, very important. Radical hope. We go back to the beginning. I'm Palestinian. This is a very important part of my identity. Every Palestinian that I've ever met, including, people that I just met, but myself included, and my grandmother until her dying day, we all share the belief that Palestine will be free, right? This is a radical hope because it's rooted in our imagination. It's rooted in the belief that something will happen beyond our lifetime. But it's also rooted in being okay with it not happening in our lifetime,
Mhm.
right? A free Palestine might not happen in my lifetime. It might not happen in my children's lifetime. And that's okay. And thank you for wearing your keffiyeh. Excellent, Mom. That's a great timing. Um, we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with building something that we can only imagine. We don't have to see it, but we can imagine it, and that's enough. And so when we build campuses that support newcomers, we build them for a time beyond us. And that's the work of advocacy. That's the hope, is that you do work for future generations. It's not about you. It doesn't have to be about you, and you don't have to be here to see it.
I love that. I know that people advocated for me, and I never met them to be able to gain citizenship in the US. I never met them, but they were doing this work in the sanctuary movement in the 80s. And I truly believe that we're doing work for people that we may never meet, but it's important in today. So thank you, Dia, for that message and reminder that radical hope is something that we need to cultivate. And I'll pass it over to Ella, who will guide us in the Q&A. There's a few in the chat.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you both so much. Gia, thank you for this amazing conversation and the radical hope that we all, I think I can see for all of us, we really need right now. And it's such a beautiful thing to hear. And just this wonderful light that you're providing us to be able to look to is really incredible. And I love that you talked about imagination and imagining the future for others. And I think that's such an important part of oral history. Often people think it's about people sharing, the past events or things they've gone through, which include things that are, very painful, and which can include things that are very painful and traumatic. But so much of oral history is also asking people, what is your dream for the future? What do you want to tell future generations? What is giving you hope? And I think being able to ask our narrators that, to provide dignity, to ask them that, a space for dignity for that, and to hear them, because there is guidance and wisdom in their hopes as well, and imagining a better future together. So beautiful. And Fanny, thank you for facilitating this wonderful conversation. Yeah, some questions and a lot of love are coming in through the chat. Zainab has a question on for Dia. Is there any interaction between the academic departments on a campus and the SOT project, such as an English or anthropology professor integrating the project methods and outcomes into their own curriculum? So sounds like opportunity, if this is happening on a campus, to work with other campus departments.
Yeah, that's such a great question. So, SALT is really brand new. We've just kind of released this. We're hoping that it'll find its way onto a curriculum. I will say that American Refuge, which was published 3 years ago, has found its way to courses where people are teaching about refugee issues, but want to include narratives, right? So often the narratives that we hear from individuals represent a moment in their time. So when we're talking about refugees, we sort of talk about the time where they've been displaced and maybe resettled, but a refugee is really only a one descriptor of an entire person's life. And so narratives that seek to holistically represent the complexity of a human's experience from birth until years after resettlement is crucial. And that's sort of, what I tried to do with American Refuge. To answer the question maybe a little bit differently, every campus a refuge, the best way to for a campus to institutionalize this work and to make sure that your campus continues to host refugees and support them in ways that are ethical and meaningful and co-creative is to embed it in your curriculum and your co-curriculum. So at Guilford College students minor in forced migration and resettlement studies, they get credit for hosting refugees on Guilford's campus and supporting them in their resettlement. Um, Other campuses that do this work connect it to certificates or courses. And I'm hopeful now that we have just released these stories that they will be embedded into those courses where students are not only, because here's the thing, and if I may just talk about this for a second. Um, Academic engagement can be incredibly exploitative. and extractive, right? So you can teach about refugees and then you interview refugees so that you can learn about refugees. That is not the model that we encourage. Every campus of refuge is about hosting refugees and centering their needs and desires. And if you're learning as a student, then you're learning as a byproduct by accompanying that person. They are not a subject or a specimen for you to learn from about forced displacement. So we want as much as possible to supplement the learning of the student with ethically sourced material like SALT, like American Refuge, like all the other resources that have been conducted ethically, so that the folks that you're hosting, you're truly focusing on their needs. You're not trying to understand or extract information from them for your learning. So what we try to do at ECAR is provide resources that allow people to learn, which is very important. Student learning is a huge piece of this because there are future advocates. Imagine every campus, there's 20 campuses, but we're talking about hundreds of students who have engaged in deep, meaningful, direct ways with individuals, right? That contact theory, right? You meet someone, you're not going to believe the stories that tell you that you should be afraid of that person because you've met them. But at the same time, meeting them should not be extractive, right? It should not be exploitative. So we want to provide resources that allow people to learn about forced displacement and about the refugee experience, but not at the expense of the refugees that you're hosting as a campus.
Thank you so much. I think that's such an important, yeah, very, as Zainab said, a very thorough answer, and such important wisdom. And I think just, just plus wanting everything you just said, especially about centering folks so that they're not interview subjects or specimens, but it's about their agency and what they want out of the project. And that's the biggest thing, to be respective. And learning can happen as a wonderful byproduct, but not at the expense of someone's dignity and their wishes. So thank you so much. There's still time for some more questions. If people want to direct them to me or in the chat. What I'll ask Diya is, obviously right now with the new administration, there's a lot of fear from folks who are part of the immigrant and refugee community. Do you feel like current or future potential narrators who are refugees, are people more hesitant to share their stories? And if so, what are some insights or tips that you might recommend people kind of think of in order to, try to safeguard our narrators as much as possible during such an intense atmosphere?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that also from the Palestinian perspective, I know that a lot of folks are, quite scared and anxious. I would say we have not had any requests to take down any of the stories, but I would say if any request comes through, you should absolutely honor that. So if you're sharing a story and someone says, "I am no longer comfortable having my story or my name out there," we should honor that request and take it down immediately. I would say that it's really important as we try to recognize the impact of the current administration's sort of, definitely fear-mongering, but policies and tactics that are designed to make people feel scared, that we acknowledge that the fear is real and that we provide folks with as much information as possible to protect themselves and to protect each other without vilifying communities. Within the forcibly displaced umbrella, there are so many different statuses. And it's so easy to say, yes, but you're legal and you're not. And we should not engage in rhetoric and discourse like that as much as possible. Make sure people know their rights, but also that we are in alliance with each other and that we support each other and we're here to protect each other. And so having legal status doesn't mean that, we don't protect others who might find themselves, at the mercy of the current administration's whims and tactics. So my recommendation is put on events, give out flyers that, educate people on their rights, but also as much as possible, encourage an environment where people protect each other and understand that we're all in this together.
Thank you so much. And I couldn't think of a better sentence to end on of what we are all in this together and that we are here to protect each other. We're just about out of time. So I want to just say thank you all so much. Dia, thank you for just this wonderful conversation full of hope and love and care for the future, reminding us to care for ourselves and each other. Fanny, thank you for this conversation, as always, being such a having wonderful questions. And thank you to all of you for being in the audience, for engaging with us, sharing your reflections, sharing your questions. It means a lot to us that you're here and taking the time to talk about this really important topic. I'm just going to share my screen as we're finishing this wrapping up this conversation. Want to shout out that Voice of Witness is going to hold our annual summer workshop series at around August, where we kind of dive into some of the topics around interviewing, editing. So if you're interested in doing your own oral history project, please look out for those workshops. The registration is now open on our website. Also, as I mentioned before, please partner with us. We love getting to connect to other people out in the community who are doing their own projects, who maybe have never done oral history but want to connect it to the mission of their org or their own personal work. So please check out the different services we have available. You can also email me. My email's at the bottom, Voice of Witness. Check out our website for different free resources on oral history and curriculum. Follow us on social media so you can find out about other events. We're going to send a follow-up email with links to some of the things we talked about, including eCar and SOT and all the other projects Dia was mentioning. And we also just want to acknowledge that it's a really intense, challenging time for nonprofits, especially in the arts like VOW. And so if people are able, have the resources to donate or support us, every little bit really supports the programming that we do to continue having workshops and sessions like this. So if you're able to be able to contribute something, we appreciate it. When if it's not a monetary contribution, spreading the word and just letting people know about the work we do means a lot to us. So again, thank you all so much. Big shout out to Dia. Thank you all so much for being here, and hope everyone has a great afternoon and evening. Take care of yourselves, everyone, and be safe out there.
Thank you.